Bad intention can take several forms. Depending on what it is, it can either be smoke curling around someone like a storm cloud brewing, or something more nefarious. Smoke is simple. I see slight wisps of it around a person, or hanging around in the air. That's basic bad intention, like cheating on a test or considering being rude to someone. I'm okay with smoke. I can usually ignore it. Sure, it kind of has a scent which makes me feel nauseous, but it's tolerable. That kind of intention is normal. I'm pretty sure if I looked in a mirror, it would be around me too when I'm in a bad mood. On the other side of the spectrum is the kind I can't deal with. It is intention which haunts a person and will not let them go, will not get out of their mind until they have satisfied that disgusting, vile thought. It is poisoned emotion and feelings compiled into one bleeding black monster, wrapping itself around its victim's neck. Pain, joy, lust, and anger. It was all of them. A vicious cocktail of human emotion, creating something horrific. It can be triggered by something. Trauma, for example. But no matter what, it is always there, waiting. Faint, but still noticeable. I used to think they actually were monsters, that they were responsible for the bad things people did. But then I came to realize it wasn't a monster. What I saw was part of the person. It had been part of them since they were born, a sour, slithering shadow bleeding from them. It is impossible to cut away, to detach, like a shadow. And it follows people everywhere, whispering into unsuspecting minds. Whether or not the person acts on it, the color will either darken or fade. Most of the time it gets darker, but I've seen it fade. I'll use simple bad intention as an example. When I was 5 years old, I was shopping with my mother, and she didn't have enough cash for groceries. She smiled at the cashier and did the walk of shame back to the milk aisle, pulled the whole milk carton out of her cart, and paused before putting it back on the shelf. I'd seen the smoke before we even went into the store. When she was strapping me into the back seat, I'd noticed a grey plume dancing around her. I wasn't scared of it. If anything, I thought it was pretty, giggling to myself. "Mummy, what's that?" I said. I pointed to the smoke, enveloping my fingers in it. It reacted to my touch, black tendrils dancing around me. Mum twisted around, searching for something which wasn't visible to her. She looked right past it. "What is it, sweetie? There's nothing there." The smoke had gotten darker as we got closer to the store, and when Mum was frowning at the carton, halfway to putting it back on the shelf, she took a moment to glance at her bag. I saw the exact moment the thought entered her mind, and the smoke around my mum tightened itself around her. It wasn't fun to look at anymore. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to look away. When I did, Mum was sighing, putting the carton back on the shelf and grabbing my hand. On the way out of the store, the smoke faded until it was nothing but tiny sizzles of electricity sparking out. See, that is the intention that starts off bad, but strong minds can fight it. My mum wanted to steal the milk, but she forced her way through that thought and put it back. I've seen really bad intention too. I want to tell you everything, in as much detail as possible, but talking about this is hard. Still though, I need to give you some background, right? Or what I'm going to tell you is going to sound insane. I've only ever seen really bad intention a few times in my life, so I've kept away from it. I've glimpsed it in passing. An old man frowning at a stray cat. A little girl glaring at her mother standing in front of traffic. But I don't look further. I just keep walking and pretend not to see it. There was a point where I couldn't avoid it. I didn't know my kindergarten teacher had bad intentions. She was called Mrs. Jess. She had pretty hair which smelled like apples when she picked me up, and she told jokes we all laughed at. Being so young, I knew seeing smoke was a bad thing. But what about something which was even more terrifying? Something which stopped me in my stride and elicited a shriek, clawing in my throat. I didn't mean to catch her. I mean, it was Mum's fault. After class, she'd made me go back into class to grab my macaroni statue I made. I'd knocked it over and messed it all up, but Mum insisted on seeing my creation. So, being a stubborn 6-year-old, I'd stomped back up my kindergarten steps and pushed open the doors with way more force than necessary. Stepping into my kindergarten classroom, I automatically felt a sense of dread building in my gut. The lights weren't on, and the smiley face paintings we'd all made looked eerie in the dim glow of the setting sun through the wide windows. Ignoring the squirming in my gut, I ran over to the macaroni statue, still half stood in all of its clumsy glory, slightly tipping to the side. Gathering it into my arms, I made a quick escape, eager to get back to Mum. Before I could make it to the door, a sharp cry rang out, and I'd stumbled to a stop, almost tripping over my shoes. Mum was on the other side of the door, I thought. She was going to hug me and tell me everything was going to be okay. But somehow I found myself moving backwards, my gaze searching the air for smoke. It was always there when something bad was about to happen or had already happened. I saw it immediately, hanging in the air like black slime. There was a trail, spatters on the floor, bleeding black leading me further down the hallway, until I found the source at the very end. Mrs. Jess. She was standing with a bright smile on her face, and she was wearing her favorite dress. She still had the plaits in her hair, the ones I tried to do at lunchtime. I was already smiling, the knot in my gut starting to unravel. I opened my mouth to greet her, but the words choked in the back of my throat when I saw it. It was huge, a slithering snake of pitch darkness, wrapped around her throat, dripping onto her white dress and tainting her legs. Its tendrils gagged her smiling mouth and pulled it into a foul grimace, which sent me stumbling backwards. It was everywhere. The monster swarmed her, enveloping my teacher's face. It wasn't just blanketing Mrs. Jess, but the hallway. Puddles of slime I had to fight not to accidentally step in. The teacher's smile broke through the sour-smelling beast crawling around her. I had to cover my mouth and nose. The stink was putrid. It was sour milk and rotten food creeping into the back of my nose and twisting my gut. Cassandra? She said my name in question, like always. Her voice was no different, sweet and flowery. What I had trusted. And yet, I could see who she really was. I could see what she was hiding. Behind her, the door was open. In the distance, her car engine rumbling. Cassandra, are you okay? I didn't move. I couldn't. Cringing away from the bawling black puddle on the floor, creeping towards me. I didn't understand why Mrs. Jess was a bad person until the door she was standing next to opened. the boys' bathroom. A smaller figure appeared hand in hand with a stranger. I couldn't even see the man through the darkness choking him. He was nothing but a twitching darkness with a tight hold around Wendy Lily's hand. From the frightened look in my classmate's eyes, I knew the stranger wasn't her father. I started to scream. Maybe it was because of the darkness growing around me, consuming everything, including Wendy, or because my kindergarten teacher had grabbed my arm with far too much force, her facade crumbling. Luckily, I got my mum's attention, and she called the cops before Mrs. Jess and the stranger could drag Wendy away. I found out years later, over breakfast where my mum read it in the newspaper, that my teacher had lost her own daughter several weeks before, and had intended to steal Wendy for herself. Mrs. Jess had served 5 years in prison before dropping that bombshell, before taking her own life. The monster I saw that day was the first time I saw the kind of intention which can poison your mind until you can't think straight, until you have to satisfy and feed that craving. I'm not here to talk about that incident in kindergarten. I want to talk about something which happened recently, what I'm still coming to terms with. I grew up mostly ignoring bad intentions, either because they're only light or I really didn't want to get involved. The kind of bad intention where you have no way of stopping. A kid pushing her mother into oncoming traffic. An old man taking a cat home and suffocating it with his recently deceased wife's favorite scarf. How am I supposed to stop things like that? I can't see what they're going to do, only if the want is strong or weak. There was a time when I tried to stop bad things happening. It was never a monster, just smoke a little darker, or what looked like a storm cloud. When I was 14, I followed a teenage boy home when I saw the dark cloud above his head. I was convinced he was going to kill someone or cause serious hurt. The boy had stopped halfway down the street and pulled out his phone, glaring at the screen. He'd pressed the phone to his ear and cleared his throat loudly. "Hey, Mum?" His voice was choked up. "Yeah, hi. Dad's fucking Aunt Mara." His lips pulled into a grin. "Okay, bye." Since then, I've been hesitant to try and stop people acting out on bad intention. If it was just smoke, it really could have been anything. I was thinking about the consequences of that boy calling his mum and spilling that kind of invasive information halfway through Mr. Ash's detailed explanation on artificial intelligence. It was English class, but someone had asked if AI was ever going to take over the world, and that had plunged the class into a discussion which went from aliens to artificial intelligence, and then somehow to fighter jets and airplanes. Mr. Asher was an avid enjoyer of aircraft of any kind, I'd noticed. He had posters on the walls of anything from a 21st century plane to a weird robot thing which looked straight from a sci-fi movie. "What is the most important part of an aircraft?" His voice snapped me out of my thoughts, and I lifted my head from where I'd been meticulously doodling Adventure Time characters in the back of my notebook. I had been battling a headache for most of the day. After hoping it would disappear on its own, I swallowed a Tylenol with a half bottle of flat Coke, and it was yet to have an effect. I figured staring at my desk would help, but a dull pain was already crawling across the back of my skull. "Anyone?" Mr. Asher urged the class with a sigh. "Come on, guys. This is preschool stuff." Fourth period English was usually the time I tuned out of the class. It's not like we learned anything. Mr. Asher just ranted about future mechanical weapons and AI replacing the US Army. Riveting stuff. Most of my class were either half asleep nor buried in their own work. Still though, some kids were listening, mainly the girls. The teacher was easy on the eyes, let's say. 40 or 50-something years old with an actual jawline and a Hollywood smile. He looked good for his age. Of course, the girls were listening to his rant. I jumped when Mr. Asher clapped his hands, snapping the class out of it.
Come on, wake up. Most important part of an aircraft.
Do you mean like a plane? Miller Jason raised her hand awkwardly. The wings?
Yes, Miller,
Mr. Asher said.
The wings. I'm glad someone is listening. But what else? Come on, I'm talking about the power of the ship. The craft would have no chance of moving without it.
When there was no response, Mr. Asher clicked his fingers in front of a girl's face. I was half listening, shading my jake in. I'd drawn his face weird. He looked more like a deformed Squidward.
Wake up, Marina. What have I told you about sleeping in class? Join in the discussion. Come on, let's get some energy.
Why aren't we doing English? Kai Oliver spoke over kids yelling out ridiculous answers. This is English and we're supposed to be studying the Crucible. So why have we spent the last hour and a half talking about your weird obsession with planes? He was right. I mean, Mr. Asher really did make his obsession obvious. He inserted that particular subject into every discussion. Kai's words sent a shockwave through the class. Some kids laughed. Others muttered that he was rude. I expected the teacher to start shouting at him. There was a pause. A moment of silence when I could hear my individual breaths as I struggled to mend my Princess Bubblegum's hair.
That is very true.
Mr. Asher cleared his throat.
And we will, Kai. But first of all, why don't you answer my question first?
I'm not sure why, but the teacher's words had weight to them. A second meaning. His tone was different, and I couldn't figure out on what it was.
So?
The teacher's footsteps startled me, the click-clack of his shoes making his way over to the back of the class where Kai was sitting. I was a few seats away from the kid. As Mr. Asher got closer, my pencil slipped from my fingers. I thought it was a fluke. I thought maybe a sandwich had gone bad in my bag or some idiot had brought in sour milk. But no. The smell was suddenly there. Real. A putrid aroma suddenly choking the air, creeping into my nostrils and burning my throat. I had to slam my hand over my mouth to stop myself from puking. I felt my body stiffen up, my breath growing thinner and thinner as the teacher's footsteps stopped in front of my classmate's desk. I heard the creak of Kai's desk when Mr. Asher leaned on it.
Why don't you tell me?
I didn't dare look up. Just for a moment I wanted to be blissfully unaware. But when my gaze went to my lap, my eyes were already wandering. I saw his shoes first, expensive leather slip-ons. As my gaze traveled up, I saw it. I saw writhing darkness, blurring my teacher from reality completely, wiping out his face. His body was the only thing left, along with half of his head swallowed in the monster's tendril, snaking around his throat and shoulders, slithering tendrils already restraining his wrists. The air was thick with the foul stink, already travelling around the classroom. It didn't touch the other students, focusing on my teacher. I could just about glimpse a patch of Mr. Asher's face peeking from the abomination blanketing him. I could see what nobody else could, and what had been highlighted by the thing. His smile, which was far too big for his face, almost cartoonish. A nightmarish grin growing and growing and growing on his face. The thing was pulling at his lips, fashioning them into a horror spectacle.
Mr. Oliver,
the amalgamation of writhing shadows said.
What is the most important part of an aircraft?
I could feel myself moving back in my chair, my body physically reacting to what I was seeing. My throat burned, a cry clawing to get out, hysteria tangled on my tongue. The pilot, obviously, Kai said, his voice slicing through my hurricane thoughts. For a moment I was confused why he wasn't jumping up and freaking out, pointing at the nightmare which was our teacher. And then reality settled in. Kai couldn't see the bad intention. He couldn't see what the teacher was thinking, what was emitting from him, a sickening urge which was driving him crazy. It was a craving, a lust, to do the unthinkable. And I had no idea what the unthinkable was. It could have been anything. Murder, or worse. It had to be that bad. The monster wouldn't be there if it wasn't something that could cause injury or death, whether that was mentally or physical. Mrs. Jess's bad intention was to kidnap my classmate and make the little girl her own daughter, and the monster had been bad. This was worse. This thing was sending my lunge into my throat, turning my gut. When I risked a look up, it was everywhere. A sentient tendril of darkness, worming its way around my classroom, burying itself into the walls like mold. I found my gaze latched on the two of them, student and teacher, as they seemed locked into a staring match. Kai with a slight smirk, and Mr. Asher with intrigue. Kai was the smartest in the class. Usually he kept quiet and to himself. But his intelligence couldn't be hidden in skyrocketing test scores worthy of an Ivy League school.
That's right.
Mr. Asher backed away, his arms folded across his chest. The darkness followed him, growing thicker and thicker. The more he was thinking, the more his thoughts were growing more twisted in his mind, and that craving was getting worse.
Tell me, Kai, would you ever pilot an aircraft?
As my teacher's bad intention was getting worse and far more realistic, a tangible thing he was starting to plan in his head. The smell went from sour milk to rancid burning and something dead. Something rotten. I could see every fucking emotion on the patches of face still showing through writhing black. He was planning, and that plan that he was putting together in his head was exhilarating him, so much so that the teacher began to tremble with excitement. Look away. The word struck me. Look away. But I couldn't. I couldn't look away, because I wanted to know. I wanted to know what was going on in his mind, what was so vile that his bad intention was enveloping him, transforming him into a beast from my childhood nightmares. Kai raised an eyebrow. Me? He leaned on his fist, clearly contemplating. Nah. He laughed. I'd probably crash it.
Nonsense.
Mr. Asher spoke with such vigor and excitement. To any other person, he was just excited.
Why do you think that?
He leaned forward, anticipation igniting in his expression. I'd never seen him so excited. It was sickening. I've read about people who have openly said that they want to know what goes on inside a psychopath's brain and leads them to commit the atrocities they do. Trust me, though, you don't. You won't see logic or explanation to why they did it, because it doesn't exist. This isn't sickness. It's not something which should be studied. It's a craving which can't be explained. A tumor which grows and grows and grows until it's all-consuming. And I see all of it. I see it from the start to the finish. I saw it in my English teacher, Mr. Asher, who had managed to hide it so well until something triggered it, bringing out his demons and showing me everything he was thinking. Everything except what he was planning to do to Kai Oliver.
You're the first person this year to be recommended to an Ivy League, Mr. Oliver. And you're worried you couldn't be able to pilot an aircraft.
Kai shrugged. Well, it depends which craft, he said, before picking up his battered copy of The Crucible and waving it in the teacher's face. Can we actually study now? Not that I don't love talking about planes, but we need to actually do work. For a moment, I thought the teacher was going to argue, before he nodded and stepped away.
Quite right,
he said, before resuming the discussion he'd started right at the beginning of the class. I watched him walk back to the front of his class and slump back into his desk. He picked up The Crucible and started to read. But his planning was not ending. His thoughts were so loud, perpetuated in the stink in the air and shadows swallowing him up until he was nothing but a blur of black. I buried my head in my knees and forced myself to breathe. I had to stop it. Whatever it was, whatever he was planning, I had to stop it. It's not like I could go to the police and tell them I was seeing bad intention on my teacher. I'd be sent to the psych ward. So I followed Kai Oliver around. It sounds stalkerish, but I was determined to make sure he wasn't a victim of bad intention. Kai Oliver was boring, I'll just say that. After class, he went to the library for a study period. I sat opposite him and pretended to read The Crucible. He spoke to me twice. The first time was to let me know that I was reading my book upside down, and the second was a while later. He lifted his gaze from his copy, a small smile curving on his lips. You're following me? No, I'm not. Yes, you are. Kai closed his book. You followed me from Mr. Asher's class, and now you're doing a bad job of pretending to read a book. He cocked his head. What is it? Do you want me to tutor you or something? That's what the other kids want. Other kids? He nodded. Yeah, I was stalked by a group of girls a few weeks ago. I thought they were interested, but no, they just wanted test answers. Kai rolled his eyes. I got used to it eventually, but I don't tutor. His eyes darkened. You want to know the secret of getting good grades? It's called working. Your social life just doesn't matter. Lock yourself in your room and study hard. I leaned back in my chair, attempting to look casual. Kai and I weren't friends. We had never spoken in our collective 17 years of life. And yet, I felt like I had to get close to him to save him from a horrific fate. Why would I need a tutor? If I kept him talking, I could keep an eye on him without it being weird. Judging from his expression, though, I had already made it weird. The boy looked amused, not annoyed. That was something. At least he wasn't telling me to fuck off.
"You got the lowest grades last semester," he said. When I opened my mouth to ask how, he shrugged. "I peek at the teacher's notes sometimes."
Kai stabbed a page in his book.
"You're on thin ice, Cassie. They're about to call your parents."
"Oh, that's..." I drew out a breath. "That's pretty bad."
"Yeah, it's pretty bad."
He shot me a smirk before jumping to his feet.
"Like I said, just study. If you really want those grades, work for them."
Kai sent me a sarcastic salute.
"There. Happy now? Now you don't need to follow me everywhere."
Panic flooded me when he started to move towards the door, and I was automatically on his heel, trying to keep a good distance. When he pushed through the library doors, I followed, shouldering my backpack. "Where are you going?"
"Home."
Kai didn't turn around, quickening his stride.
"I work better at home, and, well, no offense, but you're kind of freaking me out. You've got crazy eyes, Cassie."
Kai mimed bugging his eyes out, laughing to himself.
"What? Do you see dead people?"
Something like that. Looking around the corridor, I didn't see any smoke or shadows. Mr. Asher was nowhere to be found, and neither was his bad intention dripping from every crevice in the ceiling. Kai took the stairs 2 at a time, and I made an effort to keep his distance. Kai reached into his jacket and pulled out his earphones, corking them in. Still no Mr. Asher. Class was still in session, but I expected the teacher to make his move quickly. I had to make sure Kai got home safely. My brain was in overdrive as I ran after him. Eventually, it became too obvious. I was catching up to him, and the boy kept twisting around and shooting me warning glares, like he was seconds from calling the police. Kai crossed the main road quickly, ducking into an alleyway, and I aimed to follow him. I remember stepping forwards onto the road with full intention to run across it and after him. But at the corner of my eye, smoke was forming in the air, billowing, dancing, twirling under the late afternoon sun. It was coming from a truck driver, and it only took one look across the road at a woman pushing a stroller, holding hands with a smiling little boy, for me to know his bad intention. It wasn't quite inevitable yet. Still grey, but it was there. It was at the back of his mind, already eating away at his thoughts. I found myself transfixed by the smoke, and I forgot to move. Forgot to remember to get out of the road. I don't remember the car hitting me. It felt more like the world was imploding around me, and I was the center of it. My head hit solid concrete. That I know. Next thing I knew, I was in hospital, surrounded by my parents and several nurses, wearing wary smiles. According to them, I had mostly head trauma and a sprained ankle. I felt like shit, but I was already panicking about Kai. After downing half a glass of water, I asked my parents how long I had been asleep, only for them to tell me that it had been 5 days. 5 fucking days since I'd been asleep. It was an induced coma, apparently, to make sure there was no internal bleeding. I tried to get out of bed, but my body was aching, my head swimming. "Kai Oliver," I managed to hiss out when Mum insisted I got rest. "Is he okay? Did anything bad happen to him?" Mum got a funny look on her face. She looked like she might reply before deciding against it. "What is it?" I whispered. She stood up. "Nothing for you to worry about. Get some rest, okay? I'll be back tomorrow." When she left my room, I only had to turn my phone on to understand her paling cheeks. 3 students from my school had gone missing, including Kai. Smart students, I realized after looking through the names. Lily Hartley, Kane Jacobs, and Kai Oliver. I remembered seeing their names gilded in gold in the school's main reception. My mind whirred with questions. What would Mr. Asher want with smart students? I felt guilty for not seeing his bad intention with Lily and Kane. After reading through a local article posted 2 days earlier, I felt sick. It hadn't been a week since their disappearance, and the police were already ruling it as kids skipping town. All of them were 18, but that didn't matter. It didn't make sense that there was barely a police investigation. When I felt well enough to stand without tipping over, I discharged myself from the hospital. Mr. Asher's house was easy to find with some Googling and a conversation with the school receptionist. He lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. His house was what you would expect a middle-aged man to own. A large Victorian build with modern touches to it, a skylight built into the roof, and a gate with a mechanical lock I found myself standing in front of. Before I could press the button, I smelled it again. Sour milk. The air around me blurred, and I glimpsed a shadow at the corner of my eye.
"I wouldn't go in there, kid."
The shadow had a gruff voice. It sounded like an oldish man. When I turned to look, there was nothing there but the slightest outline indicating a human figure bleeding into late afternoon light. The figure smelled of bad intention, but his voice was strangely gentle.
"Every soul in that house is dead."
I didn't move, didn't speak, though he must have known I wanted to know more.
"I was a detective in the late 90s,
he murmured.
A bunch of kids disappeared, 16 or 17 years old. I knew it was the teacher as soon as I was put on the case."
His laugh was gravelly.
"That man was a fucking weirdo, but the kids loved him. Anyway, I tried to set up an investigation into him and was laughed at by the other guys. So I thought, fuck it, I'll do it myself."
The man's breath was startlingly cold, prickling my neck.
"Worst thing I ever did. Because the next thing I know, I'm being strung up and gutted like a fucking pig." He didn't say much to me, only that he was going to watch me bleed out slowly, so I'd feel everything. And I did. I felt him tugging out my insides like the bastard was enjoying it. Well, he most likely was.
His words sent shivers down my spine, and I took a subconscious step back.
"I still don't know what is in that house to this day."
The man sighed.
"I can't get in. I didn't write the Being Dead rulebook, so I have no idea why I can't enter my place of murder. I just remember the shit he told me while he was watching me spill my guts. He calls it his metal kingdom. Something like that. Whatever the fuck that means."
He snorted.
"The man's a lunatic. I pray for those kids' souls. The ones he took in the 90s, and now. Whatever he does to them, I bet it's a fate worse than death.
I caught what looked like a finger blurring into view. He pointed to a window on the top floor.
I see him sometimes at night. It's usually when they visited their parents. They're good company, but most of the time I can't bring myself to meet eyes with them, you know? I couldn't save them. Oh, fuck. The three of them were right below me, and I couldn't save them. They killed me before I could, and even then, I didn't even make it to where they were. I was 2 steps into the kitchen before a lamp was slamming down on my head, and there I was, strung up in his piggy barn, ready for the slaughter.
I didn't realize I was speaking until I heard my own words hit the sound barrier. He's taken more of them?
Yeah. Older this time. Around 5 days ago.
He paused.
I'm guessing these are friends of yours.
I didn't answer.
And
he cleared his throat.
You're going to completely ignore everything I'm telling you and get yourself killed too.
Again, I didn't answer. I pushed the button and stilled myself.
It's your funeral, the man grumbled. Just tell me what's in there, all right? I've been waiting almost 30 years. I just want one question answering. Why kids?
Not just kids, I thought. Smart kids. Not to mention another question driving me crazy. Why were the town protecting him? The man, or at least the outline of him, faded, as well as the stink of sour milk. I was back in reality, standing in front of my psycho teacher's house after his victim just told me he had murdered 3 teenagers in the 90s and had kidnapped 3 of my classmates, who were no doubt going to have the same fate. I wanted to turn and run, but before I could, the gate swung open. The speaker crackled, my teacher's voice coming through.
Cassandra Samuels?
Even his voice was tainted with the stink of rot and mold.
What brings you here? This is quite the surprise. I was actually just about to attend a dinner date.
I managed to find my voice.
I need help,
I said, panicking. With the crucible. I don't understand it.
That is what the online whiteboards is for, Miss Samuels. Find all resources in the latest folder I uploaded.
I don't have internet at my house, I lied. My power's gone off and my parents are at work. He paused.
I can spare some time to go over some of the points we went over in class. Why don't you come inside?
Mr. Asher greeted me in the doorway. His bad intention was gone, which meant he'd either fought against it or given in. I already knew which one it was. The teacher led me inside his house. It was cozy, with a lounge I peeked inside, and a kitchen which looked far too sterile. His laptop was set up on the dining room table, and he offered me a seat before pulling out his teacher's notes and a copy of The Crucible. We had gotten maybe 20 minutes into a lecture I wasn't even fully taking in, when the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I had to get out of there and find out where he was keeping the other students. I figured using the bathroom excuse would work, though, to my surprise, he shook his head. shooting me a sly smile.
Ah, no bathroom, I'm afraid. Both of them are currently out of use.
Tapping my pen on the notepad, I was struggling to swallow my mediocre lunch. That's okay, I said and jumped to my feet. I should probably get going anyway. My mind was already working ahead of me. I counted my steps, and then his following mine. Mr. Asher led me out into the hallway, and I passed an expensive-looking table laid with paperweights. I wondered if he'd used one of them to knock out Kai and the others, as well as the detective. Before I could hesitate, my hand was whipping out and snatching up a glass paperweight shaped like a heart. The teacher had his back to me. It was the perfect hit. I bet I was shadowed with bad intention at that moment. But if it was to defend myself and find my kidnapped friends, did it really matter if my soul was blackened too? I didn't think. I just swung the damn thing. Mr. Asher had twisted around to talk to me, and I had taken the chance and slammed the paperweight as hard as I could into the back of his skull. I expected it to be a knockout, like in the movies, but I was unaware real life was far different. My teacher didn't collapse to the ground, but he did stumble, howling in pain. He was caught off guard, so I struck him again, which this time sent him tumbling to the floor. He was still breathing, somehow. I took that as an opportunity to explore the mammoth of his house. I made sure to shut and lock the door in case someone came in, and I dragged my teacher's unconscious body in the downstairs bathroom, locking that too. You might think this was all meticulously planned, but I was just panicking. I checked the upstairs first. All of the bedrooms were empty. I knew they would be. I guess I was stalling. I really didn't want to check the basement, though when I was sure every room had been searched through, the only place left was down narrow concrete steps. The basement wasn't what I was expecting it to be. I thought I'd find some kind of torture chamber, or at least my friends tied up. That is what I thought my teacher was. I thought he was a psychotic kidnapper who reveled in pain. What I found, however, was a room which looked like it was made of metal. The walls were concrete, but everything else was glistening metal, which took my breath away. Dim light shone down on three metallic structures, clumsily built but well enough to look like a real craft of some sort. It was like something from a sci-fi movie. They were in three colors: pink, blue, and green. Humanoid structures towering over me. I blinked, tearing my gaze from whatever project my teacher had been working on in his spare time. Whatever I was looking at could wait. I had to find the others. I risked using my voice in a whisper, scanning the room. "Hello?" I hissed. "Is anyone down here?" I nearly jumped out of my skin when the structure next to me, the blue one, flashed suddenly. It hummed like it was powering up. I triggered it somehow. Voice activation, maybe? I ignored it and kept searching. There were empty boxes at the back of the room, as well as a door which looked like it led into an old bathroom. I was twisting the handle when the humming grew louder, and I could have sworn it sounded like a groan mixed with a yawn. "Cassandra?" The voice sent me twisting back around, my gaze going to the structure, which was now powered on. Oh, thank God. Kai was talking. his cry filling up the room. But I couldn't see him anywhere. "You need to help us," he hissed. For some reason, I couldn't stop staring at the blue machine. It seemed to be flashing in sync with what he was saying. Mr. Asher went fucking crazy and knocked me out. I don't know what he's done, but I woke up here. I can't fucking move, man. I think he's drugged me or something. Kai. I cut him off. Suddenly, it was so hard to breathe. My body was paralyzed, and I could sense my hand slowly moving to cover my mouth. The metallic thing in front of me had stopped flashing. I took a slow step backwards. "Where are you?" "What do you mean, where am I? I'm right in front of you. Are you blind, Cassie?" My brain was suddenly in full control of my body. I took a step forwards, and then another, and another, until I was resting the palm of my hand on the thing's metallic shell, which hummed in response. "Hey, no touching. Get me out of here. God, man, he's done something fucked up to me. Does he have me, tied down or something? I can't feel my legs or arms." I don't think words can describe what I felt at that moment. What I felt when I searched the room further, when I pulled open the mysterious door and found a toilet leaking bright red, and what my teacher had tried to stuff down it. I was screaming, and I couldn't stop myself. I didn't care that I could get caught, that I might freak Kai out. I couldn't fucking stop. My hands were over my ears, and I was begging for it to be a nightmare. It had to be. It had to be, right? But Mr. Asher's words from class were haunting the back of my mind. And all it took was looking in the teacher's project to understand what the man had meant. What is the most important part of an aircraft? The pilot, Kai Oliver had answered. "Would you ever pilot a plane, Kai?" The teacher's voice was ringing in my head. Looking at the shiny metal structure in front of me, I came to the realization that Kai was the pilot. He was the pilot, I thought, thinking about what was stuffed down the toilet, what splattered the walls and floor. I only saw half a torso, and slimy pink and red before I'd backed out of there and heaved up everything in my gut. I couldn't leave him, leave them. I didn't look at the metal thing with Kai's voice. I looked at the old wooden door, hiding his remains which our teacher had failed to hide. "Kai," I spoke softly, gently, so he wouldn't freak out. "I'm going to get all of you help, okay?" "What?" His tone grew frightened. No, Cassie, don't leave me here. I can't move." Tears filled my eyes. "You're right," I said. "He, drugged you. You're in a bad state right now." My stomach lurched when his sob rang out, tinged with something robotic, something humming on the edge. "I think something bad has happened to me, Cassie," he whispered. "I can see you, but I can't see myself. Am I okay, Cassie?" The majority of Kai Oliver was in the bathroom, while the rest of him towered over me. I took another step back, my breath thinning. "You're fine," I bit out. "I promise I'll get you guys out of here." The metal thing flashed. "Okay," Kai sighed. Just hurry up, okay? I've got a test due on Monday and fuck, I still need to finish my Yale application. He groaned, and the structure moved slightly, its twitching arm jolting. Man, I've got so much work to do. It sucks that arsehole chose the busiest week of my life to decide to kidnap and keep me in his fucking basement. Kai was humming to himself when I left him. I left Mr. Asher and called the police, pushing past the detective who stepped in front of me. "What's in there, kid?" I didn't reply, focusing on what I was saying to the cops in hysterical shrieks, which racked my chest. When I spoke to the lead officer, calmly trying to explain what I had seen, I knew someone would help them. Someone would get them out of there. I waited for the report. I waited for the cops to storm my teacher's house and pull out his filthy secret. Except that is not what happened. They stormed his house, but they only found him, locked in the bathroom. According to them, there was no metal monsters in the basement, and I was arrested for attempted murder. It all makes a sick kind of sense. For reasons out of my knowledge, this fucking town is protecting my teacher, in the past and present. Mr. Asher dropped the charges when my mum begged him, but when they dared put me in front of him, I couldn't help myself. I screamed at him, over and over again. "Why?" I asked him, and I didn't stop screaming at him until I was dragged out. It's been 3 months. I didn't bother with college. I'm still trying to get in that fucking house. I'm still waiting for his bad intention to show up. And when it does, I'll be ready. I'll show the town. And this time, they won't be able to cover it up. I will show them what my teacher did. And I'll get them out of there. Whatever is left of them. Whatever is powering those things. I promise you, Kai, I will get you out. Hello, sinister listeners. If you've enjoyed this story, then you'll find all the author's information in the description below. For more content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to succumb to the sinister.